The bullets that tore through the Romanov family on that July night in 1918 did more than end lives. They punctured the membrane between two Russias, letting the old world bleed into the new. But before the shots rang out in that Yekaterinburg basement, before history conducted its final orchestra of violence, the last Tsar of Imperial Russia was simply a father watching his children sleep, counting their breaths like pearls from a broken necklace. Nicholas II, emperor and autocrat of all Russia, had never wanted the crown. It sat upon his head like a magnificent curse, each jewel refracting the weight of 300 years of Romanov rule. When his father Alexander III died in 1894, the 26-year-old Nicholas wept not just for his parent, but for the life he would never have, the simple existence of a country gentleman, walking through birch forests with his beloved Alex, far from the suffocating protocols of the Winter Palace. "I am not prepared to be a Tsar," he had written in his diary. "I never wanted to become one. I know nothing of the business of ruling." These words would prove prophetic, etched into history with the iron stylus of revolution. But Nicholas's tragedy wasn't simply his inadequacy, it was his awareness of it, coupled with an unwavering belief that divine right trumped human capability. He was a man caught between centuries, wielding absolute power with trembling hands. Alexandra, his German-born wife, brought her own phantoms to the Russian court. Born Princess Alex of Hesse, she arrived in St. Petersburg carrying the weight of Queen Victoria's England in her manners and Martin Luther's Germany in her soul. The Russian Orthodox Church gave her a new name, Alexandra Feodorovna, but could not give her what she truly needed: acceptance. In the labyrinthine world of the Russian aristocracy, she remained forever the outsider, the cold Lutheran princess who refused to dance at balls and spoke Russian with a German accent. Her isolation bred a peculiar kind of madness, one that wrapped itself in the cloth of religious fervor. When her son Alexei was diagnosed with hemophilia, the royal disease that had haunted Queen Victoria's descendants, Alexandra's world contracted to the size of a boy's bedroom. Every bruise on her son's body became a personal failure, every cry of pain a dagger in her heart. It was this desperate maternal love that would lead her to Grigory Rasputin, the Siberian starets, whose hypnotic presence seemed to ease Alexei's suffering. The children of Nicholas and Alexandra were born into a fairy tale that was already beginning to curdle. The four Grand Duchesses, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, grew up in a bubble of privileged isolation, their world bounded by the Alexander Palace's walls and their mother's anxieties. They were known collectively as Otma, their individual identities subsumed into a collective of white dresses and perfect manners. Olga, the eldest, inherited her father's melancholy and her mother's intensity. She read philosophy and wrote poetry that hinted at the darkness she sensed gathering around them. "The world is beginning to seem like a dream," she wrote in 1917, "and the dream is starting to look more like a nightmare." Tatiana, the beauty of the family, became her mother's confidant and nurse, shouldering responsibilities beyond her years. Maria, the forgotten middle child, sought approval through compliance, while Anastasia, the youngest, used humor as a shield against the encroaching shadows. And then there was Alexei, the hemophiliac heir, upon whose fragile shoulders rested the future of the Romanov dynasty. His illness transformed the emotional geography of the family, every decision, every movement of the court revolving around his health. He grew up both overprotected and deeply alone, a boy who could never roughhouse with friends or play sports like other children. His condition became a metaphor for the dynasty itself, a hidden weakness that could trigger a catastrophic collapse at any moment. The Russian people, meanwhile, were writing their own story. While the Romanovs retreated into their gilded cage, revolution fermented in the streets of St. Petersburg. The contrast was stark. While Alexandra consulted mystics and arranged her children's hair ribbons, workers in the capital's factories survived on black bread and watery soup. While Nicholas recorded the number of ducks he shot during hunting expeditions, soldiers in the trenches of World War I fought with cardboard-soled boots and empty rifles. The revolution of 1917 didn't just overthrow a government, it demolished a worldview. The Romanovs' fall from power was a psychological catastrophe as much as a political one. Nicholas, raised to believe in his divine right to rule, could not comprehend a world in which God's anointed sovereign could be rejected by his people. Alexandra, who had sacrificed everything for Russia, found herself branded a German spy, her letters to relatives scrutinized for evidence of treason. Their final months in captivity revealed the family's true character. Stripped of power and privilege, they discovered strengths they never knew they possessed. The Grand Duchesses learned to wash their own clothes and make their own beds. Nicholas chopped wood and shoveled snow, finding a strange satisfaction in physical labor. Alexandra, despite her chronic illness, maintained her dignity even as her world crumbled. Yet the psychological toll was immense. The family's letters from captivity reveal a desperate attempt to maintain normalcy in the face of the abnormal. They played cards, read books aloud, and performed amateur theatricals, all while guards watched their every move and revolutionary committees debated their fate. It was a performance of normality that became its own kind of madness. The night of their execution was a study in cruel ironies. They died as they had lived, together, bound by family ties that proved stronger than imperial power. The sisters, who had sewn their jewels into their clothing, hoping to preserve some fragment of their former life, found that their attempt at preservation only prolonged their suffering. The bullets ricocheted off the diamonds, requiring the executioners to finish their work with bayonets. The disposal of their bodies was the final indignity, an attempt to erase not just their lives, but their very existence. The bodies were burned, doused with acid, and buried in scattered locations, a desperate effort to prevent their graves from becoming shrines. But the attempt at erasure had the opposite effect. The very mystery of their end transformed the Romanovs into something more powerful than mere historical figures. They became symbols, their story a cautionary tale about the price of isolation, the danger of divine right, and the terrible cost of failing to adapt to a changing world. In the end, perhaps their greatest tragedy was not their death, but their life, the way they remained prisoners of their own mythology, unable to see the world changing around them until it was too late. They died not just as victims of revolution, but as casualties of their own inability to evolve, their faith in divine right proving no match for the rising tide of human rights.